farming. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My presentation today is taken from my article in the latest edition of the International Journal of Orthodox Theology, which in itself is taken from my book, Eastern Orthodox Christianity and Animal Suffering, Ancient Voices in Modern Theology, where I try to outline a theology and also try to give the latest research in different areas, both for priests to be better engaged with the subject, but also try to guide animal protection groups into a dialogue with the church. So this is one of the aims of what I've tried to do. So, I have divided this presentation into these 5 areas. I don't like to read out slides, I think you can all see that. I begin by identifying the urgent need for theologians to engage with the serious issues outlined in these and other scientific reports on climate change. One area of consensus in virtually all of these reports is the recommendation that we change from an animal to a plant-based diet. The reason they do so is because the trillions of animals used for food significantly impact climate change via greenhouse gas emissions, water usage and pollution, and land destruction. Essentially, it is both harmful and unsustainable. Although the precise figures remain under study, it is nevertheless clear that emissions from animal food production is one of the largest single contributors to modern climate instability. Why then do I and my colleagues focus our attention today on animals and not the environment? The first reason, as we can see, is that they are interconnected. Thus, we must be mindful of both aspects of the contemporary cosmic disharmony. Cosmic disharmony is not new. It is evident in the work of many church fathers who explain that various forms of injustice pollute the land, that natural disasters and starvation are the result of the evil that people have done, and that this evil pollutes the earth and angers God. Arguably then, little appears to have changed, except one vitally important point. The scientific reports state, and they state it very clearly, that we have only 12 years to effect real change. If we fail, we risk not only the collapse of our civilization, but also the extinction of the majority of life on this planet. Some will argue that the subject has nothing to do with the Christian church. There are numerous biblical and patristic texts that stand in opposition to such separationist statements. I shall examine only the first of these presented here. Christ includes the human creature alongside the non-human creature. This is not as it is seen in the translations in the West, but if you look at the Greek, this is what it says. And how I can be sure of that is that the early patristic teachings on this text also use son and ox. And they are clear that this equivalence of care is neither an accident nor to be ignored, for it illustrates and confirms Christ's love, compassion and mercy for all of his created beings. In this text and Luke 13:15, Christ draws his audience's attention back to similar Old Testament texts which outline God's expectation and compassionate care for animals. Thus we may view the Old Testament texts as foreshadowing Christ's teaching. This attests to a deeper spiritual message than the purely anthropocentric and utilitarian reading of protecting a possession or an asset. Please note that Christ expects each one of us not only to care, but to act, and act immediately, to prevent both human and animal suffering. These contemporary teachings reiterate that early authority. We are to synthesize past teachings into a response for contemporary issues which continues the living tradition of the Orthodox Church. However, there are problems. These three statements by Orthodox academics and theologians span 4 decades and bring me to our second reason for engaging with the animal aspect. We generally fail to engage with the suffering of animals. Part of our role today is to be a voice for this part of creation and bring an anamnesis of an Orthodox tradition that speaks of the need for compassion and mercy for animals, regardless of the species or their circumstances. These statements testify to the gap between our theory and practice. My concern is that I see the climate debate advocating changing from beef to chicken with the expectation that all will be well. This would not deal with the scale of dietary change required, nor the animal suffering within the intensive farming model, which is my focus today. Aside from their teachings on cosmic disharmony, the Fathers also teach that righteous behaviour and compassion will redress both the cosmic imbalance and oppression caused by human sin. In changing from an animal to a plant-based diet, or reducing our intake of animal food, we achieve both. When speaking on compassion for animals in Orthodox theology, Metropolitan Callistos teaches that animals are innocent and their suffering undeserved, and for too long they have been viewed as disposable lives for the use of humankind rather than creatures loved by God. This is not sentimentalism, which is a frequent challenge to us. It is searing spiritual clarity which springs from a loving heart and the conviction that there is an organic unity and interdependence between the natural world and ourselves. It is also recognition of the continual evil in the minds of the fallen, sinful creature. In this regard, the Metropolitan mirrors God's recognition of the continuing evil in the minds of human beings when deliberating on Noah's sacrifice of the animals God had asked him to save. This is frequently overlooked, and I'd ask you to look at it, Genesis 8:20-21. The Fathers teach that sharing in the divine life is realised not only through our participation in the goodness of God and sharing in Christ's obedience, but also in our willingness to sacrifice our fallen nature with its self-indulgent passions. Our theology, Orthodox theology, Christology, eschatology, anthropology, etc., form the foundation for viewing the world as sacrament, and that the Eucharist reveals and restores the pre-lapsarian peace of paradise, whilst witnessing to the future peace of the cosmic community of the life to come. The hagiographies of the saints are witness to that possibility in this world. Part of the priest's role as image is to reveal God's glory in creation, to enact God's love to all created beings, to facilitate their flourishing, and to prevent their suffering. Our role is to till and keep, not abuse and destroy. Many vegan vegetarians choose as violence-free diet as possible because of the terrible violence and animal suffering involved in the animal food production industries. Here are some specific consequences. In terms of numbers, as I say, we are talking in the trillions each year. There is a huge amount of research in this area, and I condense some here. There is a great deal more in the book for you to investigate, so you become familiar with it. In order to meet the requirements of industrial production and high-density housing, animals have parts of their bodies removed without sedation or pain relief. The pain is considerable and long-lasting. Physical and mental illnesses result from other factors such as lack of stimulation and this high-density housing. Many other reports and scientific studies outline numerous other examples of such suffering, such as avian and dairy cattle osteoporosis, as a result of intensive egg and dairy production. Many believe that animal welfare laws ensure that animal deaths are humane. Sadly, many countries do not have animal welfare laws, and even within countries with animal welfare and protection laws, many fail to enforce them. And so, whilst changing from beef to chicken will help to a degree with the climate, but certainly not enough, it will not address the animal suffering. There are many incidences of animals dying long and painful deaths. There is no other reason for these practices other than the desire for increased profit, the evil profit that Metropolitan Callistos describes in chapter 6 of my book. There's an interview there. The research is clear. Our choice of an animal-based diet results in considerable animal suffering and, as we saw earlier, significant environmental damage. Our treatment of animals and the environment clearly need to change, not only for the sake of not only for the sake of ourselves and our planet, but also out of compassion for the animals. The final section, the role for the church. The early fathers frequently taught on our choices and their soteriological consequences, and here modern voices reiterate their teachings. They caution us on the consequences of our misuse, indifference, or inaction regarding environmental problems. The point I wish to make here is that ultimately we create the demand and market for this specific animal abuse in the intensive farming markets. Therefore, if we change from an animal to a plant-based diet, we will considerably reduce the number of animals suffering and killed. One question arising here, and there are many in the book that need answering, once we become aware of the great suffering that occurs in the intensive farming system, is it a sin to continue to consume the food produced from that system? As governments and the UN conferences continually fail to adequately address climate change, we as a church and as individual Christians have a vital role to play. Yet again, there are problems. How do we change from words to deeds? Whilst Orthodoxy does not have a legalistic system, or hold the belief that good works alone will confirm our salvation, the Fathers do acknowledge that our choices give an indication of our spiritual journey towards or away from God's saving grace. These teachings consistently urge us to turn from a life of continual consumption towards a more simple life which requires sacrifice. But as right as these teachings are, they have been said for decades, and very little has changed. Kahneman's work on cognitive biases and irrational thinking, I think, play a significant part in why we continually fail to change our irrational behaviours. But there are other important factors. We assume that the laity hear patriarchal declarations, and just as importantly, that they understand the significance of those teachings. I suggest that we are more likely to succeed in delivering those messages if they were regularly delivered by the parish priest. And so, to the clergy. For decades, Economou, Stilios, Limouris, and others have suggested that the Church re-evaluate its theology in light of our treatment of the environment. In light of the suffering of the animal creation, it seems reasonable, therefore, to expect the same re-evaluation of teachings concerning them. However, these requests remain unfulfilled. In 2014, I asked Father Christakis if seminary courses included care for animals and the environment. His answer was no, but knew the Ecumenical Patriarch would support such initiatives. In 2015, Metropolitan Zizoulas wrote the top quote that suggests courses still did not exist in any traditional manuals of theology or academic curricula, anywhere, Catholics, Orthodox, Protestant. In 2017, I asked the same question to the head of the leading American college and received the same answer. In 2018, I therefore included the same question in my book with the criticism that if this was still the case, it not only indicated a further gap between our theory and practice, it also indicated a lack of commitment and/or indifference to the crisis before us. I added that it was likely that such inaction would have soteriological implications for those who have the power and authority to act in this regard, but fail to do so. In Appendix B of my book, I have outlines of a master's program and a seminary module, which can be adapted to each of the different countries as required. So, if we do modify seminary and academic programs, what could we teach that is both achievable and effective in addressing animal suffering and climate change? Here are three proposals. The first is a teaching from Abbot Khalil at Balamand, and would be a good first step, because we can't impose this. We just have to try to teach why they should try to reduce their consumption of animal foods. The second promotes the plant-based diet directly. If promoted, the Church would reiterate God's original intent, apply the concept of ascesis, and align with contemporary science, which highlights the damage caused by an animal-based diet. The third recognises that the intensive farming model is against the tenets of Christian care for creation and ought to be rejected. Finally, a positive note. Kyros. We are most definitely in a time of great danger for this world. The fact that we are here at this conference, I think, is significant. There are positive signs of change, and I outline some here. Slowly but surely, contemporary teachings are defining the sin of animal abuse, misuse and exploitation. Father Chris Abgis has invited me to attend the 2019 summit in Istanbul in order to speak on behalf of the animal creation and why knowledge of animal suffering and compassionate care should be included into seminary courses. Hopefully 2019 will see the end of this particular gap between our theology and practice. And finally, I haven't had the opportunity of doing so, but I would like to thank His Eminence for his support on this theme, his role as patron of our charity, Pan-Orthodox Concern for Animals, which has a Russian page, a Greek page, a Romanian, and we hope to do more, and also for Paul for his willingness to engage with this subject. Thank you.